everyone, welcome back to my channel. For today's video we have a eyeshadow palette collection slash declutter video. I have been saying for quite a while now that I did want to do an eyeshadow palette declutter, but due to lockdown my process of going through a different eyeshadow palette every day did kind of stall because I wasn't reaching for eyeshadow palettes every single day. So I probably haven't gone through all of my collection as much as I'd wanted to. So I'm going to try and make this as speedy as possible. I don't know how that's going to work, but we shall see. I have tried to count up the total amount of palettes here about 10 times. I keep getting a different number. I'm hoping once I've done the declutter I will be able to actually count it and I will be able to put any numbers on the screen at that point. But I think there's about 45 palettes here, which is definitely a lot of palettes, but I will be the first to admit that eyeshadow palettes are definitely a weakness of mine and I am always tempted by them. So let's see how many I can get rid of today. I think I will start down the bottom here, because I do kind of want to mention one as quickly as I can. This is the Jeffree Star Shane Dawson Conspiracy palette. Won't be decluttering this and kind of regret purchasing this palette, and obviously I did spend money on it and it would be a waste to just get rid of it now, but it is a brand that I no longer support. The next palette we have here is this Vibes palette by Ruby May Cosmetics. This is probably the brightest palette in my collection, and because I don't have too many bright palettes I think I am going to keep hold of this one. Another bright palette I have is this BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival. I do love the BH Cosmetics formula. This is a really great palette and one that I do reach into when I do want a bit of brighter colour, but I'm actually just going to compare it to the Ruby May one shade wise quickly. Okay, so looking at the shades here, actually these two shades are very similar to each other. These two pinks are very similar, so are these two pinks. That is probably a slightly darker version of that one. That is a shimmery version of that one. We also have an orange, even though that one's slightly darker. That is very similar to that. And obviously we have a gold here. I don't think I'd appreciated that before, but I can basically duplicate every shade in here in this one. Don't get me wrong, I do really like the Ruby May palette. It is really good quality, but I'm going to reach for this one more because it has got the neutrals. So I think I'm actually going to get rid of the Ruby May palette. I'm very glad that I actually put these two palettes next to each other because I might not have made that realisation otherwise. So this Ruby May one is going into the declutter pile, and I will be keeping this one from BH Cosmetics. Then we have this Too Faced The Natural Nudes. I do really like this palette and I am glad I picked it up. This has definitely changed my opinion of Too Faced shadows. This has everything you need to reach for a neutral look. And I can't actually pinpoint which my favourite shade is because I do like so many of them, but this is a great palette, so definitely one I will be keeping. Then we have this Colourpop Ooh La La palette. This is obviously one of their £9 palettes and one of the first £9 palettes I believe they released. I do kind of wish I'd realised when they first released this one that they were going to continue to release £9 palettes, because I maybe wouldn't have picked this one up. It's not quite my colour scheme with the bright shades, but I thought with pinks I might be able to work with it more than I do. It's not a palette that I find myself reaching for an awful lot, and to be honest it's one that I don't think I'd overly miss if it wasn't in my collection. I do struggle to get rid of Colourpop palettes because it is quite hard for me to get Colourpop here in the UK, but if I'm honest I don't love this palette and I do kind of have to force myself to use it, so I think I'm going to declutter this one too. Then we have the Morphe Jaclyn Hill palette. This is the palette in the original formula. This formula has now changed, and from what I understand the formula now is not as good as the formula as it was. This is a palette that when I first purchased it I did kind of regret my purchase because I didn't find myself overly reaching for it. Now it is a palette that I definitely love. If I didn't have such a large collection and only had this palette, it would be everything that I needed. I can't obviously recommend you purchase it now because of what I've heard about the new formula, one I will definitely be keeping. Then we have the Urban Decay Naked Cherry palette. This is one that I feel like I don't give enough love to because it is such a great palette. This is one I will definitely be keeping. Then we have this one from Wet n Wild. This is the Rose in the Air palette. This one I haven't even used yet. It is still sealed as it is brand new to my collection. I'm really excited to give this one a go because I've not tried anything from the newer formula of Wet n Wild, only the older formula, which I have one up there somewhere. So I am excited to give this one a go, and it is my kind of colour scheme, so this is a keep. The other Wet n Wild one I have is this Walking on Eggshells. This is one that I always used to throw in my handbag if I was going for dinner after work. Both of those things seem kind of alien at the moment, not working in the office and not been to a restaurant for a long time. But this is quite an old palette and I feel like I have quite a few other little mini palettes now that I would be tempted to throw in my handbag instead of this one. I like that it does have the little brushes with it, which I do tend to use, whereas other palettes I would have to have a brush with me or just use my finger. So I'm really not sure what to do with this one. I think I'm going to declutter this one because I just don't reach for it enough, and I'm not going to restaurants anytime soon. Then we have this one by IBY Beauty. This is the City Limits palette. This is a palette that I got in a Tribe Beauty box. It was a brand I'd never heard of before, and I'm really impressed with this palette. It has so many pretty shades in it. I particularly love this Fire and Ice shade, which is a really pretty duochrome. I don't think there's a shade in here that I don't like. Maybe this one here, Drop Base, is one I don't reach for as much, but most of the shades in here I will tend to dip into. Formula wise, it is a great formula. The mattes blend beautifully and the shimmers are really nice as well. I do wish that this brand was actually available here in the UK because I would like to try another palette from them, but unfortunately it's not. So definitely keeping this one. Then we have the Emily edit from Makeup Revolution, and this is the Want palette. This at one point was an absolute favourite of mine, but I just don't find myself reaching for it as of late. It doesn't help that it is such a big palette and does always end up kind of towards the back of the drawer, but I did just find that the kind of quality of it did deteriorate over time. I think you can see on camera here, but we have quite a few palettes that have kind of hit hard pan, especially this one down here, Heartbeat, which hit hard pan really early. I think most of the other shades I can probably dupe in other palettes, so I don't know if it's maybe time to get rid of this one now because I just don't find myself reaching for it. I think I'm going to have to create a maybe pile with this one in for now because I can't quite decide, but I am leaning towards decluttering it. Next we have this palette from Sigma Beauty. This is the Enchanted palette. I am terrible for remembering to take brushes out of palettes and actually use them, especially because this is Sigma and feels really great quality. I need to take this out and actually put it with the rest of my brushes. This is a palette that I have only had for a couple of months, but like I say, I've not been overly wearing eyeshadow at the moment, so I haven't reached for it an awful lot. I do slightly regret picking this one up. I don't know if I maybe should have picked up the Cor de Rosa one instead. Don't get me wrong, this is a really pretty palette. I just struggle to think of looks when I open it without kind of reaching for the same shades every time. Don't feel like I've used this one enough to say that I don't like it enough to declutter it, but I don't absolutely love it, so I do kind of regret picking it up. But for the moment it is going to stay in my collection because I don't think it's been there long enough. Then we have a couple of kind of Z palettes that I've put my own shades in that I'll just go over quickly. So this one has a couple of shades in from Inglot, a shade in from Juvia's Place, and then I believe the rest of these are Colourpop. And then obviously there's a Tarte face palette in here as well. I do also have this palette which has shades that I made up too. We have another one from Inglot, we have a bronzer from Tarte, and then the bigger pans here are all Juvia's Place. And then I believe that the rest of these are also Colourpop. Because of the size of the shades of the Juvia's Place palettes, I did end up having to order this palette to try and fit them all in. I do kind of wish I did just have one palette with everything in, but because I need somewhere to store this face palette, that's why I've had to put it over the two palettes. So I don't reach for these an awful lot because I just don't think I've created a cohesive palette yet. I will keep them and I will keep messing around with the shades. I do tend to change the shades around in the two palettes every time I pick one of them up. I just need to make this one a bit better for myself. So yeah, this is something I need to work on, so I'll be keeping hold of both of these. Then we have this Huda Beauty Amethyst Obsessions palette. This is one that I definitely regret picking up. I picked this up at the time I was determined to like purples, but the more I apply them, the more I realised they're not for me. I think it was because I wanted to try one of these mini palettes, and after trying this one and hearing that the formula of the original Obsessions palettes was slightly better than this one, I kind of wish I'd picked up the Mauve Obsessions, I think it is, instead of this one, because I think that one's more my theme. So because I don't love reaching for this one, and every time I do pick it up I never am happy with the look that I achieve, I'm going to get rid of this one. I have this palette from Tarte. This is from their most recent holiday collection, but this is how it comes. It is really bulky packaging, and it does also come with a mascara and an eyeliner, which I've not yet gone into. I'm pretty impressed. The first couple of times that I did use the palette, I did actually reach for these pressed glitters. I'm not overly familiar with pressed glitters and working with them, but the ones in this palette worked great. I also didn't have the hardest time removing them, which I was worried I would. The mattes in here blend really nicely. There was no patchiness with them as well. I really like the quality of this one, so we'll definitely be keeping this. Next we have the Saharan palette from Juvia's Place. I was definitely surprised about the size of the pans. They are huge. I don't know if it's picking up on camera here, but a couple of the shades in the middle do have hard pan on them. This did only happen recently, so I'm hoping I can get rid of it before it happens again. Even though it may look like it here, this blue and this green don't. I do kind of regret picking this palette up because I don't find myself reaching for an awful lot, and I do kind of struggle to think of looks with it. I don't know if I necessarily struggle enough to get rid of it because the formula of Juvia's Place palettes is amazing, and I do like that this does have some different shades in it. This one is close to being decluttered, but I am going to keep it for the time being. Next we have the BH Cosmetics Royal Affair palette. This is one of my favourites. I absolutely love reaching for this one, and I love most of the shades contained in here, especially this lime green here and this icy blue shade, both really interesting and unique to my collection. Okay, nothing else in here is really unique, but it is a great palette and I do absolutely love their formula, so this one is definitely a keep. Then we have the Saharan palette by Juvia's Place. This is one of the 12 pan palettes, and this is another nice palette. Formula in these is great. I do actually think the formula in their 12 pan palette is slightly better than the 9 pan, but I do really enjoy reaching for this one. I will definitely be keeping this one. Next we have this palette from Tarte. This is the Tarteist Pro To Go. This has become the palette that I do use to throw into my handbag if I need to apply makeup after work. It is a great little palette with everything that I kind of need. You've got your 3 shimmers and your 3 mattes. I can actually create a multitude of looks from this one, and the formula of these is great as well. I really love this palette and is a great one to throw in the handbag, so we'll definitely be keeping this. Next we have this palette from Winky Looks. This is the Mini Latte Kitten palette. This is the palette that I got within the FabFitFun box last year. It's a nice palette. I don't find myself reaching for it an awful lot, but I haven't had it the longest amount of time. I don't think there's any shades in here that are unique to my collection. So I don't know if I absolutely love this palette, and I don't know if it's necessarily one I would miss if I didn't have it in my collection anymore. I don't know if I need to try it a few more times before I make a decision, or if I'm just trying to cling on to palettes for the sake of it. I think this one needs to go in the maybe pile as well. I say formula wise it was nice, it just didn't completely put my socks off, so I'll stick this in the maybe pile for now. We have the Colourpop You Had Me a Hello palette. This is one of their 12 pan palettes, and even though I have only tried a couple of their palettes, I do prefer the formula of this one to the Ooh La La palette. I think this is probably one of my most reach for palettes. I do really love the formula of this, I do really love the shades contained in here, and I can always create a look without much thought going into it from this one, so this one's definitely a keep. Next we have this palette from NYX. This is the Mystic Petals palette. I haven't tried a NYX palette for the longest time, and the last one I tried I wasn't overly impressed with. I don't think I actually need this in my collection, and whilst it is still sealed I can either give it away to a friend or put it in a future giveaway. It does look like it contains some really pretty shades, but I just don't feel like I 100% need these shades because I can probably duplicate them in all these palettes I've got here, so I think I'm going to declutter this one. Next we have this palette from Urban Decay. This is the Born to Run palette. This is one that I do regret picking up because I just don't love it. I just don't find myself really wanting to reach for this one. I do definitely prefer the formula of the Urban Decay Naked palette to this. It has got a nice array of shades in it and kind of a bit of everything, and could be a one-stop shop, but especially on a daily basis I do tend to just stick to the top row. I don't reach for much of the second 2 rows. And if I do struggle to kind of think of looks for this one. So I don't know if I just need to admit defeat and finally get rid of this one. I do find it really hard to part with high-end eyeshadow palettes, especially when I know I've spent a lot of money on them. But I would just be keeping hold of it for the sake of keeping hold of it because I spent money on it, which is a bit pointless because it's still a waste of money if I'm not using it. So I think I'm going to declutter this one. I do absolutely love the packaging of it, and I do love the theme of it. But if I'm honest with myself, I don't love reaching for it, so I am going to declutter it. Next we have this palette from Zoeva. This is the Caramel Melange, I don't know how you say that. This is a really pretty palette that I picked up not so long ago. I've only used it a couple of times, and the performance of these shadows are really nice. They are decently pigmented, the mattes are really smooth, and the shimmers are really nice and blendable as well. So I am glad I picked this palette up because I did want to try something from Zoeva, and it is a nice little handy travel palette. Another travel palette is this one from Tarte. This is the Tarte Le Tease. This one is definitely well used. and is another one that if I'm not taking the Tarteus Pro To Go palette with me, it's this one that I am throwing in my handbag. I do reach this one an awful lot, so this is one that I will definitely be keeping because I do love the formula and the shades in here. Then we have these 3 palettes from the e.l.f. They're new bite-sized minis. We have the shade Truffles, Cream and Sugar and Rosewater. But these are great little shadows, and for £3 ago they are definitely worth a purchase. But I do kind of hope they continue to bring out new colour stories because the formula of these is great, especially for the price. And in some ways it does make me kind of want to pick up a palette that isn't necessarily the normal colour story I would reach for, just to maybe try it out, because I know the formula is great and it might make me kind of go in my comfort zone a bit more. So I would highly recommend these. We'll definitely be keeping all 3. Then we have this palette from Natasha Denona. This is the Mini Glam palette. This is the first palette that I have tried from Natasha Denona, and I definitely was not disappointed. Even though it is a really small palette, the performance of the shades in here is amazing, and I can now see why so many people rave about the formula of her palettes. I would be quite tempted to try another one of the colour stories because there are a couple that do draw my eye, but for the time being I'm just happy having this one. Highly recommend them, and if you are wanting to try the Natasha Denona formula, I would recommend picking up one of these ones. Next we have this one from Primark. This is the Soft Camo palette. This is one that I just picked up on a whim to try the formula, but also to kind of take on holiday with me, so that I had a bit of variation in shades than what I normally take. The performance of these shadows is really great, and I do love the colour story in here. It is slightly different than some of the other palettes that I have. I have hit hard pan on a couple of the shimmers, but I can just scrape it off and work with it. The matte in here are really nice. I would recommend this, and I'm glad I picked it up. Then we have the Balm Meet Matchmaker. I do love the setup with the duos and the kind of colour families. I do love all the shades in this palette, albeit I do predominantly reach for the top 3 duos, but this is a great palette, and you can go in with such an easy look of one of the duos, or you can obviously mix and match, but I do really like the idea of this palette, and the performance of the shadows as well is great. Then we have the Anastasia Beverly Hills Norvina palette, and this is yet another high-end palette that I do regret purchasing. I really struggle to work with this palette. When I purchased this, I was torn between this and the Soft Glam, and I do kind of wish I'd picked up the Soft Glam palette now, but instead I went for this one because in my head it was different. But I find that all of the shimmers across the top are just too soft to work with, and I always end up with them all over my face. This is a palette that I have to do my eyes before my face makeup, which is not what I usually do, because otherwise it's just an absolute mess. The mattes in this palette are extremely pigmented, and you do have to definitely go in with a light hand and work quite hard to blend them in. So this is definitely not a palette I can apply when I'm in a rush. I do need to have the time to work with this one, which doesn't happen a lot of the time, so this one does get extremely neglected. I do feel like now at this point I have given this one enough of a go to know that I just don't enjoy using it. I do definitely regret purchasing this palette, and I don't think I would miss it if it wasn't in my collection, so as much as it pains me, I think I just need to get rid of this one. The palette we have is the Nubian by Juvia's Place, and out of the palettes that I have from Juvia's Place, this one is definitely my favourite. I absolutely love every single shade in here. This is a palette that I wear every time I go to a wedding because I know my eyeshadow will look as flawless at the end of the day as it did at the beginning. This shimmer here in particular tends to stay on the lid all day long. Some of the darker ones do start to fade slightly, but this shimmer here, it just seems to stay on the lid all day long. So this is an absolutely amazing palette, and I'm so glad I picked it up, and will definitely be keeping it. Then we have this other palette from BH Cosmetics. This is in collaboration with Sylvia Garni, and this is a palette that I actually got for free because I spent so much with BH Cosmetics, I think on Beauty Bay. A palette I had my eye on a few times but never actually got around to purchasing, and I'm so glad that I got it. Seeing this palette open again makes me kind of not regret getting rid of the Born to Run palette, because it is a quite similar colour story, and if I'm honest, I much prefer reaching for this one and the formula in this one. This has obviously more neutrals than the Born to Run, so it's definitely a great palette for every day, but then it has also got the darker shades in it as well, plus these 2 shades here which can be used as face highlighters. This is a great palette and not regret picking it up. The fact I got it for free was just a bonus, so this one is definitely a keep. Next we have this palette from e.l.f. This is the new Classics palette. This is one of my favourite palettes that I've tried from e.l.f. Yes, I do love the mini bite-sized palettes, but I love this one a little bit more. I think I reach for most shades in here, including the matte black, which if a palette's got a matte black in, I don't reach for them very often because I do find them quite intimidating. But this one has a nice level of pigment that it's easily blendable and doesn't look patchy. So I absolutely love this palette, and I think it's only £14, so I would highly recommend this, and it's obviously a keep. Then we have the Going Coconuts palette from Colourpop. This is another one of their £9 palettes. So this is a really great neutral palette. I do find myself trying to do matte looks with this one more than shimmer looks, because each of these shimmer shades does have quite a lot of fallout. And like I said, I always do my face makeup first and then tend to forget about the amount of fallout. It's not the end of the world, it does just kind of put me off reaching for the shimmers. So they're definitely not my most favourite shimmer formula. I do prefer the formula in the £12 palettes, but the mattes in this are really beautiful and do blend really nicely. So I don't regret picking this one up, I'm not 100% sold on the shimmer formula down the middle. Pull these in a little bit more. So the next palette is another one from Juvia's Place. This is the Douce palette, and another one of their £9 palettes. This is a really pretty palette, and one that is slightly different with the array of shades in it. I do struggle slightly to think of looks with this one. I do tend to go with the same thing. I also don't find myself reaching for this middle shade very often, but all of the shades around the outside I do reach for quite often. I do really like this silver shade here, but I don't know if that one shows up. This one has hit hard pan as well. Obviously does happen to a lot of palettes in my collection. This one doesn't now seem to perform as well. Even when I scrape the hard pan off and get back down to the normal palette, I do find that this doesn't pack as much of a silver punch as it did when I first purchased it. So that is slightly disappointing, but overall it is still a really good palette that I do like reaching for. Next we have the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette. This is a palette that I've now kind of developed a soft spot for. This is a palette I probably should have decluttered a long time ago because I've never loved this palette. But now, because I always travel with it because of the tin packaging, it does have kind of nice memories for me. But I still don't love the formula of this one. I did actually pick the chocolate bonbon one up here to see if it was just me and if the formula was terrible of these palettes, but it is definitely a dry formula. I don't reach for this one an awful lot. I say I do always travel with it because it does have the tin packaging, and if it did ever get smashed in my suitcase, I would never be heartbroken. But now I'm thinking I have that one, so I don't know if it's time to finally say goodbye to this one, because every single time I've had a declutter, this one has nearly been decluttered, and I've always rescued it because I use the excuse that I'm going to take it on holiday with me. But yeah, the formula of these shades just feels so dry. Even when this palette was brand new, I just struggle to work with it. This pink shade here is pretty pointless. It just doesn't show up on the eyes at all. And every other look that I seem to create with this palette does just kind of muddy together. So even though I did develop a soft spot for it because I have memories of travel, I think I just need to admit defeat that I don't love the palette and get rid of it. So then for the other one I have, this is the Too Faced Chocolate Bonbons palette. This is one that I actually picked up on Glambot, so I didn't get this one brand new, but I do think the formula of this palette is slightly better than the original chocolate bar. I'm not a huge fan of the shape of the pans. It is slightly annoying to try and get your brush in there properly, but this is a much better palette to work with than that one. It has all the neutrals that that one has in as well, but also has these couple of different shades here. So I think this is a palette that I'm definitely going to keep, and this will probably be one that I will take on holiday with me. Because I did get it second hand, I didn't spend as much money on it, so if it did get broken at all because I didn't pay full price for it, I wouldn't be as devastated. So I'm going to keep this one. I'm going to get rid of the chocolate bar. Next we have this one from Tarte. This is the Make Believe in Yourself palette. This is a gorgeous palette that is all shimmers and one matte. The matte isn't the best. I do tend to use this as an accent palette with other palettes. I don't reach for it as much as I should because it is an amazing palette and the shadows do perform really great. So this one is definitely a keep. Next we have this palette from Makeup Revolution. This is the Heartbeats palette. I pretty much bought this one and the one down there for the packaging. I do quite like the colour scheme in this one. I don't reach for it an awful lot. The quality is not the best, but I feel like for the packaging I can't really get rid of it, so I have been keeping it in my collection for that. But what I'm now thinking I might do is I might technically declutter it, in that I probably won't reach for it anymore because I don't love reaching for it and I'm never happy with the looks I create, and I might just actually kind of pass it on to my daughter. She is getting to the stage now where she is wanting to kind of play makeup like mummy does, and I have bought her some fake makeup, which is just sponges, but she is starting to cotton onto the fact now that when she puts a brush in it, nothing appears on her face. So I might just let her kind of play with this, because obviously it is eye safe because it is actual makeup. I think she will like the packaging of this one and obviously the other one as well, and that way I kind of get to keep the packaging, but I'm not too bothered about the shadows in it. So even though I said I wasn't probably going to get rid of these because I love the packaging, technically I'm keeping them because I'm passing them on to my daughter, but I'm decluttering them from my kind of usable eyeshadow palette collection, as it were. They are pretty palettes, but for me I think they are more aimed at younger children. I was just drawn in by the fact they look like Polly Pockets and reminded me of my childhood. So same with this one as well. This is the Seashell palette, or Ocean's Treasure palette. I was never a massive fan of this one anyway, and even though the heart-shaped pans were slightly hard to get product out of, these ones were even worse. Because of the oval shape, you could never quite get the brush in it to get enough product of, and the shades in here never really translated onto the lid as bright as they do, especially this blue one here. So yeah, I think I'm going to pass these down to my daughter and get rid of them technically. Then we're left with two naked palettes. The first one is the original palette. This was the first ever high-end palette that I purchased, and for me it still performs as good as it did the day I bought it. This one I believe does have a 6-month expiry thing on the back. No one ever uses palettes in 6 months, or if they do, they must apply eyeshadow multiple times a day. But the performance of this palette, say, is as great as it was on day one, and I love pretty much every shade in here, and I really enjoy reaching for this palette. Then we have the Urban Decay Naked Heat. This is another gorgeous palette, great formula, really love reaching for it. As with the Naked Cherry palette, I probably have neglected it slightly as of late, but I do really love this palette, especially reaching for it in the kind of autumn months, so I will definitely be keeping this one in my collection. So back to the two maybes. So the first one we have is the Winky Looks palette. I definitely don't think I need it in my collection. It is just a kind of another neutral palette that isn't outstanding, so I am going to declutter this one as well. And I think same with the Makeup Revolution one, I just don't think I reach for it enough, and I just don't think the quality of the shadows is there anymore, so I'm going to declutter this one as well, as much as it pains me to do so. But it's just too bulky and I just don't use it enough, so yeah, I'm going to declutter this one as well. So I'm now going to bring over my two piles of decluttered and keep. So here are my two piles. We have the declutter pile here, which is 12 palettes. We have my keep pile here, which is 33 palettes. So I know I'm not getting rid of an awful lot of palettes. I mean, technically it's about a quarter of my collection, but I am getting rid of a few high-end palettes that I've probably kept hold of for longer than I should have done because I don't love them. So I feel better that I've finally got round to getting rid of them, even though this pile is still quite large. That does make me feel a bit better that I am actually making a bit of a dent into my collection. So I know it's not the most satisfying declutter you'll probably ever watch because I didn't get rid of that much, but it was sort of a collection video as well. But that is it for today's video. If you did enjoy it, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already. Thanks.